All right, we're about to jump right into one of the biggest, most heated debates happening in public health right now. It's this wild clash between new scientific evidence and some really old school thinking. And caught in the middle of it all, potentially millions and millions of lives. So let's get into it. 100 million. Just take a second to let that number sink in. This isn't just some random figure, it's a serious projection. According to public health expert Derek Watch, that's how many lives could be saved by the year 2060, an absolutely massive number. So you have to ask, how? Well, the answer lies in a pretty controversial strategy: tobacco harm reduction. And this is where we hit the central puzzle of this whole story. I mean, if the potential for saving lives is that huge, you'd think the people championing this approach would be celebrated, right? But nope. It's the exact opposite. These are experienced public health professionals, and they're being shunned, treated like outcasts by their own colleagues. It's a question that really gets to the heart of a very deep conflict. To understand why this is all happening, we actually need to rewind the clock a bit. We're going to go back about 20 years to look at the framework, the rule book that has been running the show for global tobacco policy ever since. This is it, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, or the FCTC for short. For 2 decades, this has been the world's main weapon in the fight against the tobacco epidemic. And let's be super clear here, it's been incredibly successful. It has saved millions of lives through things we're all familiar with now, like higher taxes and banning ads. But, and this is a huge but, right at its core is a rule that basically defines this entire conflict. The FCT states that there's a fundamental and irreconcilable conflict between the tobacco industry and public health. In other words, they can never, ever be on the same side. And for a long, long time, that was treated as absolute truth. But this is where the modern argument gets really interesting. 20 years ago, the industry pretty much sold one thing that killed people: cigarettes. The argument today is that innovation has totally changed the game. The industry now develops and sells products specifically designed for harm reduction. And that fundamental shift is what this entire debate is all about. So, this ideological clash isn't just some academic theory. It has very real, very personal consequences for the people involved. Let's meet some of the key figures who find themselves being treated like outcasts. This is a direct quote from Mark Tyndall. He's a public health expert, has a long and successful career in harm reduction for things like HIV and drug addiction. So when he tried to apply that same life-saving logic to tobacco, you'd think people would listen. Instead, he says he was treated as a pariah. He was basically shut out just for suggesting there might be a different way to do things. And then there's Derek Watch. Now, this is where the story gets truly ironic. Watch was one of the key architects of the FCTC itself. That's right, he helped build the very framework that's now being used to shut down this debate. It's like he designed the house, and now he's arguing that it needs a major renovation to keep up with modern science. The way people like Yak are being treated, it's intense. The source material compares it to wearing a scarlet T for tobacco, like in the Scarlet Letter. And that analogy really shows you how severe the shunning is. This isn't just a simple disagreement. It's about branding someone and excluding them from the community. Okay, so we've been throwing this term harm reduction around a lot. We've talked about the conflict, but what is the strategy at the center of it all? What exactly is tobacco harm reduction? In simple terms, it's a pragmatic strategy for smokers who either can't or won't quit. Instead of this all-or-nothing approach, it encourages them to switch to alternatives that are way, way less harmful than traditional cigarettes. The goal isn't necessarily zero tobacco, but it's to get as close to zero harm as possible. So, what are we talking about here? Well, it's things you've definitely heard of, like vapes, heated tobacco products, snus, and even e-shisha. These are the technologies sitting right at the center of the controversy. Some people see them as a lifesaver, a path away from deadly smoking. And others, they see them as a Trojan horse for the tobacco industry. And this brings us right to the core tension of the whole debate. It's been framed as a battle between two fundamentally different ways of thinking. On one side, you have science, and on the other, something that looks a whole lot more like religion. Now, that's a provocative thing to say, I know. But the suggestion here is that the opposition to harm reduction has become so rigid, so resistant to any new evidence, that it's acting more like a belief system, a religion, than a scientific position. And science is supposed to be all about being open to new data and changing your mind. And you just can't forget the stakes here. They couldn't be higher. There are over 1 billion smokers in the world. More than 7 million of them die every single year. 7 million! And that modeling we talked about earlier suggests that harm reduction could save about 3 million of those lives annually. It's crucial to remember that these aren't just abstract numbers. There's a great paraphrased line that says, a few million lives saved here, a few million there. Pretty soon you're talking a lot of lives. Each one of those numbers is a person, a family, a future. Which brings us to our final question. Science, at its best, relies on open debate, on engaging with ideas you don't agree with. So when the potential benefit is literally measured in millions of human lives, what's the real cost of shutting down that debate? What is the price of intellectual honesty? It's a question worth thinking about.